Anybody hear of a fever dream? That was a movie called Drop Dead Fred, starred Phoebe Cates and the late Rick Mayall. And I know that most of y'all would probably not recognize him. He was really big in the UK. He was a British comedian. And he was in a show called The Young Ones, I believe. But he also did voice credits on numerous things and just other things. But anyway, this movie was so crazy. And I watched it all the time as a kid. And it was just bizarre. Like, it starts, okay, it's about a girl who has an imaginary friend, and this imaginary friend just creates chaos. So anyway, the movie starts out with a mother reading like a fairy tale to her daughter, and she's saying that they lived happily ever after. And the daughter's just like, how do you know that? And so the mother's just like, because they love each other and blah blah blah. And so she goes, what a pile of shit. Credits. That's how the movie starts. And then it cuts to, or like fast forwards like 20 years, I think. And so it's Phoebe Cates playing the adult. Elizabeth is her name. She's having the worst day of her life. So first of all, she's like, she has a broken marriage. She was trying to like get her husband back. By the way, she's on her lunch hour. She's trying to do all this. And like her husband, like, or soon to be ex, like gaslights her, and he's such a sleazeball. He's just like, Lizzie, you wanted this break. And she's just like, I did? She's very naive. Well, anyway, that doesn't work out. She's on the payphone the next scene trying to call her friend. She leaves her purse in her car across the street. Purse and car both get stolen. She's late to work. She gets fired from work because of being late. All this happens within the lunch hour. So, she's got her stuff, on her way out of the building. Well, anyway, she bumps into a childhood friend of hers named Mickey. And, familiar memories are coming back. And she's, he's like, oh, hey, didn't you have like this, this crazy friend or whatever? And she's like, oh yeah, Drop Dead Fred, her imaginary friend. And like real casual. It's like, oh yeah, I had an imaginary friend. And, it flashbacks to like a scene of like she's calling on her neighbor, and she like throws like water at her, like a whole bunch of water or paint. I think it was actually paint. Well, anyway, her, like, she ends up back at her husband's apartment, or like their apartment, but she's with her best friend, who's played by Carrie Fisher. And her overbearing mother is there saying, you're gonna come live with me. And also at the same time, her mother is terrible too, because she's basically telling her that it's her fault why the marriage didn't work. Well, anyway, like, she ends back at her childhood home. She stays in her room. She finds this like taped up Jack-in-the-Box, and she's just like, oh, and she sets it there. She's trying to go to sleep later on that night. She can't sleep. She gets up. She finds that Jack-in-the-Box, or the reason why she was grabbed the Jack-in-the-Box is because it started like winding on its own, and she was like, huh, that's weird. And so she winds it all the way. Pop goes, Drop Dead Fred. And then like when he finally like runs into her, he's like, ah, but he's surprised that she's like older now, like she's an adult. And like that doesn't stop his chaos though. Like they run downstairs, and this is so gross. He's already causing like chaos. He goes outside, gets dog shit on his shoes, and he's like walking into the living room, like a freshly, pristinely cleaned carpet that her mother was like, don't step on this carpet. He smears all over that living room. And like, he's about to like spill ink too, but she gets him to like play hide and seek with her. So he like leaves. And so she goes back to bed actually. She wakes up the next morning thinking it was all made up, or not made up, but like a dream or something. She goes downstairs, and what seemingly looked like a clean living room, her mom's scrubbing that carpet. So what really happened? And of course she thinks Lizzie did it, because it's like, who else would? Well, anyway, Fred reappears. He's like, I thought we were playing hide and seek or whatever, and he sees the mom, and he refers to her as the mega bitch. And like, one pervy thing that he does, like actually a few times throughout this movie, is that he gets on the floor and like looks up the skirts of like a couple of ladies, including the mom. And I'm just like, oh, I can't believe that was in there. And I guess like when you're a kid, you don't notice that. But anyway, like, he finally has a conversation with Phoebe Kate, Lizzie, and she's just like, I'm trying to get my husband back. We're grown-ups now, and like Fred offers to help her do that. And then just throughout this movie is chaotic event after chaotic. Like one of the most major things that happens in this movie is her best friend. She ends up staying there, and while in that houseboat that she stays in, he cuts her hair and like creates all this havoc on the houseboat. He ends up sinking her friend's houseboat, Carrie Fisher, and she has to go to like her job and just casually tell her like, yeah, the boat sank. Fred sank it. Sorry, Like if I were her friend, I would not only like disown her, but I'd be like I don't know, call. Well, anyway, speaking of that, um, it finally gets around to like her mother finally intervening and stepping in because like right after, oh yeah, I got to tell you this part real quick. She meets back up with Mickey. She's like goes on this little date with him. They're eating at a restaurant, and Fred's there and like gets her to throw like pasta all over the place, and Mickey's just like, why did you do that? And she's just like, I'm crazy. Because she can't explain herself, because Fred's doing it, but like no one can see. And he starts throwing pasta because he's just so like enamored and taken aback with her. He's like, oh my God, you're just so crazy, All right, well, I'm crazy too. But anyway, they get kicked out of the restaurant. She's fed up. She's yelling at Fred in front of the entire like mall, like fed up. And so everyone's looking at her just screaming at herself. And so she's having like this breakdown moment because he's caused so much trouble in her life. And finally, she ends up like hitting this violinist at the mall because like she thinks it's Fred. Well, anyway, mother steps in, she intervenes and has her see a psychiatrist. But while they're in the waiting room of the psychiatrist, Fred actually sees a couple of his like imaginary buddies because there's other kids there who have imaginary friends. And like the doctor even explains to her, he's like, yeah, usually kids have imaginary friends, but I guess she still has hers. And Fred's doing all this crazy stuff with the other imaginary friends or whatever. Well, anyway, they walk out with the medication that the doctor prescribed her, but the imaginary friends warn Fred, like, hey, don't have her take those pills. And he's just like, why? They make you sick? I'll take them. I'm Fred, whatever. He's just full of confidence. And then the friend's just like, no, because like these pills apparently like turn off that part of the brain that like, sees imaginary things. But she, also she's getting back together with her sleazy ex-husband. So she's staying back with him at the apartment. And he's making sure that she takes her medication regularly. And then it cuts to like, later on, they're having like dinner, but like Fred turned it into like a mud pie, which was also referenced at another scene, like a flashback whenever she's a kid. They did like a messy mud pie scene that was just so gross. And actually, yeah, that was the day where the mom like basically trapped at Fred lands into that Jack-in-the-Box from earlier. And she tapes it up as like a final straw, like you're, no more of this drop dead Fred business, But anyway, cuts to her sleazy husband, the mud pie. She's just like, oh, I'll make you this nice romantic salad instead, watch it, I'll fix everything, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, fine, He goes into the next room. And then like Fred, upon taking the medication, Fred's gotten weaker and weaker. And so, like, he's almost, like, about to disappear. But he's telling, like, he actually witnesses Charles, her husband is named Charles. He's on the phone with, like, his mistress or whatever, Annabella. And he's actually on the phone with her, just like, of course I'm going to still see you. Like, ew. And he says the most cringe line ever. He says, I'm your fella, Annabella. Gross. But anyway, she actually overhears the conversation too, because Fred has her like overhear his conversation, like who's he on the phone with, and so she's just like, oh, I don't feel so good. She ends up fainting. Well, anyway, that while she's in this fainted state, she like ends up at her own like imaginary world or whatever, where Fred's like leading her to conquer her fears and become independent. because she was so dependent on her mother, so dependent and naive on her husband, that she can't like fully grow up or whatever. So he's walking her through this process, you know. And sure enough, she like one by one she defeats Charles by telling him off. She tells her mother off or whatever. And so finally she could like, you know, mentally kind of break free, and she doesn't need Drop Dead Fred anymore. So that's kind of like the sad part. He's just like, okay, well I have to go forever anyway because you don't need me anymore. For her dependence or whatever. It's kind of sad, but at the same time, silly. Anyway, she comes to after all that. No more Fred. And, you know, she ends up dumping Charles. She goes back home and tells her mom, like, hey, get a life, get a friend, you know, I'm out of here. And so at the end of the movie, she ends up with Mickey. And I forgot to say this, but Mickey mentioned earlier that he has a daughter, you know, who's funny, but like he didn't really go into detail or whatever. Well, anyway, turns out that his daughter is a little troublemaker, and even more so because now Drop Dead Fred is her imaginary friend. And of course, like, you know, Lizzie and Mickey don't see him because she can no longer see Fred. But she believes the little girl because the little girl said, hey, it's not me, Drop Dead Fred's doing it. And she's like, oh my God. You know, so she does believe him, and it ends that way. So anyway, it's like, it was one of those movies where it's like, I watched this movie all the time with my siblings, and like, it's supposed to be a kids movie, but there's some stuff in it that's just kind of like, huh, all right. Well, anyway, like if anybody else has ever heard about this movie or seen it, it's not like a great movie, but it is one of those guilty pleasures that remind me of my childhood, remind me of my siblings. We laughed at how ridiculous it was. So anyway, let me know if you've ever seen or heard it.